Welcome back to the Pitch and Pass podcast. I'm your host, Sal Asante, and with me today behind the mics, we got Daniel producing from Denny Sport Talk, We the Patriots. Everybody, last week we went over the downfall of the New York Yankees, the lack of representation of a great franchise, and I do want to do the same exact thing this week, except we're going to talk about my Dallas Cowboys. Now, this loss is it's wearing on my heart a lot stronger than the Yankees are, especially since I expected the Yankees to stink last year. So let's get into it. I got some choice words. Sure, Danny's going to be laughing in the background. Let's get into it. As you can see, avid Dallas fan, I got my Dak Prescott shirt on. I'll tell you a funny story on why I even own this shirt before I keep going, because as you'll see, you might wonder why I even own this shirt after the words I have to say today. Well, here's the honest truth. My dad didn't like Dez Bryant when we were growing up and thought that he was a little too flamboyant, thought that we shouldn't idolize him. So instead of getting a Dez Bryant shirt that I really wanted, he got me a Dak Prescott shirt. Look at where we are now. Well, let's get into it. So the most recent loss I want to talk about first, because to be honest, we'll talk about the whole season as a whole a little bit later. I want to talk about how disgusted I was with the Packers' loss and really the recent run that the Cowboys have had in the postseason and what I think it means. Now, I don't think you could put all the blame, I don't think you could put all the blame on one side. I don't think you could put it all on the players. I don't think you could put it all on the management. I think you could put it all on the coaching staff. What I do think you could put the blame on is a bad culture. All right. The only way that you see a loss like we saw last week, 2 weeks ago with Dallas Cowboys going up against Green Bay Packers for, I want to say, the third or fourth time in the last 10 years in the postseason. The same story every single time is that the Cowboys look unprepared when they come in and play. Now, last week was the worst example of that because in most cases, at least we have a game to watch. Now, there's stuff that we could Monday morning quarterback, we could go back and try to fix as fans and get upset about, but generally speaking, we lost by a score. The refs screwed us. They had one play call. They had a Hail Mary by Aaron Rodgers, right? When we talk about 2024, what just happened to the Dallas Cowboys was a complete meltdown. And it was honestly mental toughness, I think, was the biggest pointing factor. But another thing that you could say is just a complete lack of control of the entire organization, right? The coaching staff had no cohesion, right? So one thing that I do want to talk about is the fact that you hinged your entire defensive game plan on one player. That one player not being able to do his duties made you call defenses that your entire defense was unable to play. What I'm talking about in this scenario, for those of you that may not be fully aware, is that we had a pretty big injury happen to our number one corner. Okay, Stephon Gilmore. Stephon Gilmore pretty obviously was a little more banged up than the Cowboys wanted to lead on going into the playoffs. They wanted to say that he dislocated his shoulder, he's fine, popped it back in place, he's wearing a sling. Yeah, it turns out he tore his labrum. Can't play too well on a torn labrum, all right? Now, when you talk about playing man defense, there is no press ability. There's no ability to give a guy a shot when he's trying to run down the field. That's why they were playing zone defense all the time. And if you're a Cowboys fan wondering why zone defense was being played on a team that's played man 80 to 90% of the season, there's your reason right there, okay? Now, hold on a second. She's calling me. All right. Where the hell was I? Hold on a second. Talk, Daniel. Oh, now I can hear you. All right, perfect. Okay, where was I? Now, okay, that is just one example how coaching staff found itself crippled because of one player. And I don't see any scenario in any sport or any let's think about it in a scenario. I'll take you out of football and actually out of the world of sports for a moment, because it's something that, I'm going to assume a lot of you guys are men if you're watching this show. A lot of us men have thought about war at some point in our lives, right? It's pretty easy to think about war. You win, you probably killed somebody. If you lose, you probably got killed, right? It's a pretty simple scenario to think about. But can you imagine a scenario in war where a general notices that one of his officers is sick one day, and instead of taking care of that officer or maybe finding a suitable replacement for the day, letting him rest it out. Instead of doing anything in your power, you actually just send him out with a game plan that he doesn't know how to execute very well and say, guess we're just going to have to ride it out and see how you do today. Could you think of any scenario in which a general might send his army into that situation? Because that's basically what the Cowboys did with their players last week. All right? And you can only imagine now with that, knowing that scenario in your mind, can you imagine what the offensive players are thinking when they fuck up that first drive or when they don't score first? They're thinking, man, our defense is not going to be able to stop them today and we can't score. You can understand why that mindset starts to creep in of we're not going to be able to get this done. Doesn't mean that it's a good thing. I'm trying to explain of why this might have happened, because when you get to a point when you have second stringers coming into a playoff game, something went horrendously wrong. Something went wrong to the point that the other team thought that it was okay against the number 2 seed in the playoffs to bring in their backups. Okay, now, of course, we got to go talk about what happened between the offense, what happened with Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. One of the biggest things that I have to point out with is the fact that you could read on their faces the emotions that they're feeling before they even got a chance to touch the ball. If you could read it on Dak's face, you could read it on CeeDee Lamb's face that they're already frustrated. They already look like they're not going to give it their all. Well, how could we as fans expect any sort of a performance? And of course, we got what we saw there. We got 2 guys who were not ready to compete. And one of those things that I want to call back to our Yankees episode is when you expend so much money into so few guys and you don't get performance out of those guys, obviously, I think you just put 2 and 2 together, it's impossible for you to have a winning formula at that point. And that's where the Dallas Cowboys, I think, are seeing themselves. Now, I want to get off this game. This game has pissed me off for weeks. All right. And it has made me consider throwing the whole team in the garbage. And I will talk about that a little bit later. But I want to talk about the entirety of 2024, 2023, 2024 first. I want to talk about what it was going into the season and really why this last week was such a disappointment. So, heading into the season. All right. So, discounting, we're not talking about the draft picks being made before this season. The Dallas Cowboys draft and record, I'm sure you could agree, Dan, for the last few years has been fantastic. Right? The production that we're getting out of, especially our early rounders, our first, second, and third round picks has been really fantastic. And that stopped this year. Okay. Now, it wasn't necessarily their fault. You have people like Jordan Lewis kind of playing a position he wasn't really suited for. And you can make that argument, I guess. But really, when you think about athletes like Micah Parsons, when you think about someone who's put into a position that maybe they're not so comfortable with, what you want to see is you want to see that instinct, that killer mindset come out in that person that I'm not letting this position go. This coach thinks I can handle this. I'm going to eat it up. Nobody's taking this job away from me. And you didn't see that from any of the rookies in the Cowboys except for one of them. It was our kicker, who was taken away from the XFL, I believe. He had the longest streak go without missing a field goal, and then he missed 2 in a game, which was inevitable. It was going to happen. So don't really mind too much. Brandon Aubrey had a great season, but that is really our rookie class, I believe, is Brandon Aubrey. And correct me if I'm wrong, he might not count as a rookie because XFL might be discounted from rookie status. So I could be wrong on that. But regardless, our only rookie being an undrafted free agent, and it's a kicker. All right, so I think that has a lot to say about what happened with the Dallas Cowboys this year, which was different from years prior because we do have 3 years in a row in which we got 12-5 seasons. So let's talk about it a little bit. So you had going into the season, and this is before the Diggs injury, you had really the promisings of one of, if not the most talented Dallas Cowboys roster, at least since the 90s when they were on a freight train that couldn't stop. Right? You had a pass defense that was seemingly going to be unstoppable, or at least damn hard to break through. You had maybe undersized but very quick defense, and then your offense was just killer. All right, you just had killers all over the field. Now, as the season starts to progress, and you see what they're doing with Tyron Smith, all right, I want that to be a big focus for Cowboys fans as well. If you need to rest your left tackle from practice every single day, and all he does is play games for you, does that tell you that there might be something wrong with your left tackle? might not be the bulletproof engine that we think he is, because I do think that that's something that Cowboys fans are a little bit unable to come to grips with. The fact that our line is starting to age. What's that? Okay. So Brandon Aubrey is confirmed he's a rookie. The rookie's not producing is not the end of the world. The end of the world is when you don't have producers coming out of your starting lineup. Now, like I had mentioned, before the Diggs injury, you had so much speculation on this being one of the most, if not the most talented roster in recent history for the Cowboys. And as soon as that Diggs injury happens, you start to see the question marks pop up. Right? And it was really nice as a Cowboys fan to see the progression of a guy like Deron Bland, who took some of that worry away. You see another defensive back who's performing decently, and not only decently, I believe the man had 5 interceptions for touchdowns this year. It was at least 4 for touchdowns, for sure. And it was 4 in a very short time. I also know that. There was some sort of record, but that at least gave us hope. But when you looked at the defense as a whole, what you started to see were these holes start to pop up where if a team was able to get to that second level, if a team was able to get their linemen into your linebacking core, you didn't have any size or strength to overmatch those pulling guards, those tackles that are coming flying with a chop block, right? You have just undefendable plays as an undersized defense and without any sort of, I don't want to say any sort of shutdown defense because Gilmore was great all year and Bland played really well. When it gets to a team who doesn't just rely on 2 receivers, they also have a tight end or they have a third slot guy. Well, that's where we saw our issues. One of the big problems, of course, was the big games. And that is an issue that I think is pervasive from Dak Prescott. I do not think that's an issue that has to do with the entire team, but I do think that it affects the entire team when they see his reaction. Now, my brother is a great person to talk sports with because he's cold-hearted and he doesn't really believe in any sort of fairy stuff, any sort of stuff that's not visible and statistical, right? But when I say that a quarterback is a leader of a team, he rejects that. And I do think that that is a misinterpretation. I do think when you look at teams led by Tom Brady, Patriots, right? Do you think that players are looking up and are playing hard for Bill Belichick in that moment? Or do you think that players are working hard and playing hard for Tom Brady, who's fighting his balls off to at least get them close, even if he was the one who put them in the bad situation to begin with? Right? Just the honest fact is, when Tom Brady left the Patriots, I think all of us can recognize that there was a severe drop-off in Belichick's ability. And it's not to say that Belichick was not a lot of the reason or most of the reason that they won previous Super Bowls, but towards the end, you're looking at really, I think, the greatness and the leadership of a great quarterback, which is Tom Brady. And I think when you compare specifically Tom Brady or specifically a Peyton Manning, specifically a Brett Favre, specifically an Aaron Rodgers to Dak Prescott, the biggest difference is that when a big game comes, they actually, generally speaking, play better. Okay. And you could even say that when it came down to someone that I really like to watch in a Cowboy uniform was the guy who Dak Prescott actually replaced. Okay. Tony Romo was, now, he had a lot of issues, and he saw, generally speaking, a lot of issues when it got down to the red zone. But the thing is, with him, it didn't matter who he was playing. And if anything, there was a lot of games where you watch Tony Romo step up to his competition, and much like you're watching Josh Allen play now, when the competition's better, he gets better. When the competition's worse, he sinks down to their level. Okay? And for better or for worse, that at least gave me a lot more hope when you're going into a game, say, Tony Romo versus Peyton Manning. Because when you have Dak Prescott versus Peyton Manning, you know that Dak Prescott's lying down and taking it like a dog. And I think we've seen that en masse over the past, I think it's been since 2014. So we're going on 10 years now of Dak Prescott with nothing to show for it. And I think he has to shoulder a considerable amount of the blame. Okay, because CeeDee Lamb had a fantastic season. And I do think CeeDee Lamb showing up to the game a couple weeks ago against Green Bay Packers, him showing up and acting the way he did could have been controlled by a good and a strong leader of a quarterback. I do think you get CeeDee Lamb back in the game, and I do think you get a playmaker back in the game within 2 drives if you have a real leader back there behind the helm, and we don't. Another big issue that I do want to talk about that really, I think, hindered the Cowboys' ability in close games to have a lockdown running game. Now, this is going to be a big thing as we look forward as well into the future with 2024, 2025, what we expect coming with the Cowboys and maybe their draft class as well. It's something that I'm going to hope that Danny can help talk us through as well, what we might be thinking. But the biggest things for the Cowboys is going to be getting this run game going, because I'm not to say that Tony Pollard is necessarily a problem, but he's not the solution either. Okay, clearly he has suffered a much more traumatic injury than we originally thought with that leg break, I would say. You see a completely different Tony Pollard this year, and he never really regained that hard running that he really gave us the hope that we had a replacement for Ezekiel Elliott. Because let's just be honest, let's face it, Ezekiel Elliott's getting old, and running back is not an old position in this league. Just trying to be honest to the people out there, we could go get Zeke back. Is it worth it? In my opinion, it's not. And I think that we should move on and really possibly consider an athletic kid coming up through the college system that maybe needs a year or two to develop, right? Maybe it's a tandem back setup. Like we used to have the three-headed monster back in the day when you had Marion Barber and DeMarco Murray and all these heads that were coming in and running the ball. I think we should consider getting back to that until we could develop a stud, because without having a consistent, strong running game, if we're going to keep Dak Prescott at quarterback, we might as well just sign our check to never get even close to a Super Bowl ever again. Right? That's just the honest fact. But all that is for naught if we don't fix our offensive line issues. All right. Now, coming back to what I think was the bright spot of the Cowboys drafting classes going back to, I'd say, 2009 and going on forward, was their innate ability to pick out offensive linemen who were just going to rip each other's heads off. We're going to rip defensive men's heads off. I mean, it's uncanny, their ability to pick out. I remember watching that line. You had O'Leary, you had Lyle Collins, you had Tyron Smith on the other side, and you had Zach Martin. The line looked like nobody was going to break through it. They were all massive human beings that moved quick, which is interesting to see. When you see a line move, they shouldn't be able to move as fast as the running back. Well, back in the day when all these guys were drafted, they did. And it was one of the craziest things to watch when the line would push and actually pretty much run. Yeah, maybe Elliott got 1,600 yard rush season. The line probably rushed for 1,200 yards that year too. It's pretty cool to watch. As you've seen them age out, as you've seen the Cowboys be unable to sign everybody and just pick and choose, right? So now we only have Tyron and Zach left, right? Now we're sticking with Biotish at the center, and even he's a free agent, okay? Our line is gutted, and we are getting to the point now where you can't trust the starters to be healthy for 16, 17 games in a season. It's just almost an impossibility when they get to the age that they're at. And you can't allow, I would say, if you're thinking about the Cowboys situation, you can't allow yourself to get into this in the future again, because now we're going to have to go through a whole drafting cycle of probably for the next 4 years picking a tackle and a guard, and probably taking 2 or 3 extra guards / centers that can play in the middle. That's just the honest truth, because we don't have those guys that are going to be able to fill the holes in the shoes of a great person like Zach Martin. Right? Tyler Smith is not going to be too long for the future unless we send him a contract, something like that retained Zach Martin. He's going to be asking for that type of money. I can almost guarantee it. Not that he's deserving it, but it's just what's going to happen to our line. And I think it's going to be one of the bigger issues that we're going to have to focus on going into this next year and this next offseason. So as we get into it, and one of the big focuses I want to make is what would I do, or what do I think would be a great move for the Cowboys to do? Because at this point, I think there's so many question marks in the air. All right, and I kind of alluded to it in our original episode where we did a brief coverage of this. It's a mindset coming from the top down. All right, so you have issues with the owner's inability to separate business and wins and success stems down to the coaching staff, stems down to the players. And when the players and the coaching staff know that this is a business made for money and not necessarily a business made for success at wins and Super Bowls, I think it really starts to affect the performance on the field. What you're going to see when you want to put out a good product. I think we're just reaping it right now as Cowboys fans. We're just getting to watch it. So what do I think would be a good change? Well, although it'll never happen, I do think it would be very important for Jerry Jones to realize that at his age, he might not have the most accurate thinking mind, especially when you're talking about a fast-moving business and sport like football. Although I don't think that he'll move on, one of the choices that he might be able to make is at least hire an assistant GM. All right, and I think that could be pretty important for him heading into the next, I would say, 5 years. So I'm trying to at least stay realistic with this as a Cowboy fan, because we know Jerry Jones ain't going to let go easy. But one thing that he's going to have to realize is there has to be a contingency plan. All right, and I know it's not mandated in the NFL like it is in the MLB, where you have to have a contingency plan or else you can't own the team. However, for Jerry Jones, I think a big factor for him is securing that legacy. And maybe it doesn't have to stay in the family. Maybe it does. I don't know the family dynamic of the Joneses, but what I do know, that is worth a lot of freaking money. And I think as a fan base and as an organization, we need to try to convince the man to own the team the way you would want someone who's going out to own a team, which is go get your championship. Let's run it through the wall and let's get the right people hired to get the job done and get out of our own way, which I think we can as a fan base start to promote. And one of the things that we're going to have to do is hold not only players, but coaches and Jerry very accountable. Something that we really struggle with. But one of the things that I think has been pervasive much longer than even Dak Prescott's been on the field for the Dallas Cowboys, I think it even stems way past the Tony Romo years, is a real lack of discipline on the field. This is by the players themselves. You're talking about penalties that you can't even think were possible for players to commit, and yet they did them, and now you know the rule because they committed that penalty. That type of play happens at least 3 or 4 times a season for the Cowboys. At some point, it starts to get really frustrating watching a group of guys that seemingly just play by their own rule book and don't have any regard for the fact that you are hurting your teammates by making silly and stupid decisions on the ball field. Obviously, you could say it's a coaching problem, but like I said, I think it really stems down to a culture thing. When all you care about is the views, all you care about is the money coming in, all you care about is really the kind of eyeballs that you might be able to get on the field that's your field, there's a lot of things that you'd be willing to do and a lot of things you'd be willing to not pay attention to if it meant that you're getting more clicks. And I think the Cowboys are in a perpetual spiral of this, perpetual spiral of promoting the wrong things because it's still making them money. Now, I think my rant is over, but what I do want to focus on in the coming weeks, coming shows with the Cowboys and, of course, the Yankees is what our plans are heading into 2025. And I think a big thing for, of course, football more so than baseball is what is our draft looking like? What do the Cowboys think they're going to move forward onto? And is there any possibility of us, moving on from Dak Prescott? Because I do think that although you could deem it as a menial topic or something that's not too important, I think it's hugely important for us as Dallas fans to require more out of the leader or the supposed leader of our team. Okay. With that said, I think that's going to end it for us. And Danny, that's going to be the Pitch and Pass podcast. I'm pretty tired. That's 3 episodes done in a day. I want you to go share it, like it, get it to anybody you think would laugh, comment on it. Let me know what you think, and let me know if you think you got some better solutions for our Dallas Cowboys, because at this point, my head is out of solutions. I think we should scrap the team. Let me know what you think in the comments. Until next time.